Good evening. All right, it is time. We're finally getting back to Knight Errant. We took a pause during the holidays, and then I missed last Wednesday. So, but here we are. We're going to do a couple of chapters tonight, and with that, I don't think there's anything more to say. We're only on chapter 2, so we've got a ways to go. I declare the dawn. The diamond's words, with diamond's words, the sun rose. I declare the dawn now as I did standing in the waters of darkness long ago. The voice grew louder as it wafted through the streets of Zakria, beckoning to day shift workers leaving for the transit hubs. Their liege had prepared another day for them. 70 meters tall, the image of Daimon, or Damon, Daiman, looked down upon his works and smiled. Colossal holographic hands opened just as the first rays of Nelchar 1 crested the city skyline. Product of 64 holoprojectors and easily the single largest non-military consumer of energy on Darknell. The sparkling image rendered the giant in surprising detail. Above were the confident, piercing eyes, blue and amber, just like the stars, and the short crop of fair golden hair. Even the talons molded to the fingertips of his right hand appeared in shimmering relief. The, the imaging specialists had done their work well. 7 marble statues depicting Diamond's rise to power and prominence ringed the image's base. Huge themselves, yet dwarfs next to the crackling titan above. Each stone figure looked down one of Zakria's major avenues, radiating from the central plaza. Diamond's rise faced celestial way, gazing the long kilometers toward the palace. Diamond at Chiloa triumphantly faced Mining Way, home to many of Darknell's processing plants. Damon's voice seemed to come from all the statues in unison. I have decided the sun will shine for 23 hours today, with 9 hours of night to follow. The warmth of summer I give to you, and light from the heavens. Kara Holt was impressed. She thought the display could have been more effective only had several of the city blocks not been burning to the ground as the holograph spoke. Hood pulled over her head. Kara slipped from one doorway to another as she made her way back home. It had been a mistake, allowing the chase with the Bothan to carry so far down Manufacturer's Way. To get home, she had to pass what was left of the Black Fang. What had been a lopsided pyramid was now a tangle of molten girders, with blazes still raging on many levels. My cosmic eyes will rest upon the people of the Southlands today, but know that I am with you always. Big Damon said. You are the encumbered. You are arms of my creation, extensions of my will. You know your functions. As far as Kara could tell, those functions right now seemed to be running around in confusion and screaming at random passerby. At least that's what Damon's sentries were doing. Normally stern and forbidding agents of order were dashing back and forth across the plaza, unsure of what to do without divine guidance. Never forget my will is... No one heard what Damon's will was because the blazing research center chose that moment to tip completely over in an exhausted faint. By the time those around recovered their feet and their hearing, the loudspeakers throughout Zakria had gone silent. They'd heard it all before. Carrie used to hear the spiel every morning on the way to her job at the munitions plant before she moved to later shifts. On all the worlds of the Damonate, listeners were assured Damon controlled everything that happened in his realm. Whoa. um, Sorry, lost my place for a second there. Those listeners might be less sure if they were on the plaza this morning. Kara thought one of Damon's thugs was on fire. She recognized him, a terror in her neighborhood for as long as she'd resided there. Now the hulking guard staggered about, screaming in pain. Kara froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Evil minion or no, the creature was suffering. She stepped into the street, only to be knocked aside by the advance of three of his fellow sentries. Remembering her cover identity, Kara began to exhale, relieved that someone else had gone to help him. Nope, they shot him. Seeing the thug fall dead at his would-be rescuer's feet, Kara rolled her eyes and retreated into an alley. Sith space was like this everywhere, a place of sudden violence, almost completely devoid of compassion or remorse. She never under, she'd never understand it, but she didn't have to understand it to win her fight. And now she had a stealth suit. A cracked window heaved upward. Lithely, Kara slipped back into her home of the past few weeks. The only things inside were a pair of bedrolls, her duffel, and a stand for the portable glow lamp she had to share with Gub Tengo's young granddaughter. From the look of the crumpled blankets in the corner, Tan was already gone for the morning. The room wouldn't have been big enough for a closet back in the Jedi Academy, a place where the students were preparing to live with no possessions. Here on Darknell, it had to accommodate two. Setting down the Bothan's pouch, Kara peeked through the open doorway into the main room. The old Celestin was there, asleep in his chair again before a mass of documents. His arms stuck out at a right angle, his worn hand shaking as his fingers clutched an invisible pen. Kara edged into the room long enough to douse the glow lamp and push him back from the table. Flimsiplast cells fluttered to the floor. Kara winced. Every part of Gub's job was insane. Not just what he had to do, but how much of it he had to do. On other worlds with long rotational periods, societies made some allowances for species that were used to standard length days. Not so for Damon's realm. The Sith Lord saw a day with 32 hours as a chance to get in another work shift. Stealing back into her chambers, Kara hung the ragged sheet that served as a door and reached for the gold-stained bag. For all the technology it contained, the Bothan bodysuit had folded up nicely. The label was just inside the seam. Ciricept. Kara hadn't been gone that long from Republic space, but somehow seeing something as simple as a familiar commercial trade name felt refreshing, and a stalwart firm at that. As the Sith had advanced farther on the outer rim, other corporations had tried to deal with the new locals, usually to their ultimate regret. The more vital to the Republic security a company was, the more the Defense Ministry usually had to cajole it to relocate. But Ciricept had repeatedly pulled its operations back from the frontier without being asked. Maybe it was because their whole stealth systems business was about staying low and keeping out of trouble. Whatever the reason, Kara was overjoyed to see the suit now, even in its despoiled condition. Her supplies from the Republic were limited to the clothes she wore and the lightsaber in her knapsack. That was never supposed to have been the case. Jedi Master Vanar Treese's venture into Damon's space was supposed to have been a surgical strike, short and well supplied, an inspiring figure. Treese had led volunteers into Sith space several times, taking upon himself missions the larger Jedi Order could no longer perform. The Sith in the outer reaches had grown so robust that the Republic, already weakened by the Kandorian plague, had largely written off everything beyond an inner security cordon. It had even deactivated the interstellar relays that allowed communications with the outside. Whole swaths of space lay abandoned. The Republic government and the Jedi Order weren't against Treese's raids. The need for them was obvious, but the woman who headed both bodies, Chancellor Ganara, knew well that her fearful people wouldn't tolerate her sending large groups of Jedi Knights on offensive when all were needed to protect the home front. Treese had cleverly found a way around that. Each standard year, Jedi Knights had been serving 3 months on law and order patrol and 9 months at the frontier, but 16 days were allotted for travel between those assignments, a figure that remained the same even as the boundaries of the Republic contracted, and as in peacetime, the travel arrangements remained in the hands of individual Jedi Knights. That had given Treese an opening. There were enough Jedi volunteers in transit at any moment that Treese could usually get a team of them to rendezvous at a jumping off point. That allowed a few days for a quick raid, usually one where no casualties were expected, before the Jedi returned to their designated duties. The result of Treese's raids generally pleased the Chancellor. The moral boost came cheaply. All ships and munitions involved came from private contributions. It was a much different reaction than Jedi Knight Revan had received centuries earlier in his own extracurricular efforts against the Mandalorians. But the circumstances, Kara recalled, were different. The Sith were evil. The Mandalorians just had an attitude problem. The logistics were complicated, but Vanar Treese had someone he could rely on in Kara. Vanar, she had always been on a first name basis with him, had rescued her from Aquilaris years earlier, just after that planetary paradise fell to forces led by the future Lord Odion. Vanar, sensing the child Kara's potential as both a Jedi and a motivated opponent of the Sith, became her sponsor and mentor. She had lost her family but found a cause. Kara always wondered if he'd given her the work because he'd thought it would be therapeutic for her. No matter, it was. At 12, she coordinated travel assignments for volunteers. At 14, she helped him raise donations. In the last 3 years, she'd taken charge of outfitting each group, making sure everything from blaster power cells to med packs were aboard ship in abundance. In a short time, Kara had learned everything necessary to run a volunteer paramilitary organization, all while working to become a Jedi Knight. It had been a busy adolescence. But she'd never joined any of the raids herself. Vanar had forbidden that while she was still a Padawan. Returning to Sith space was too emotional a mission for her, and Vanar knew it. So for years she'd lived vicariously through him and his allies, taking some solace in the knowledge that she, in some small way, was helping the people she'd left behind. When Kara became a Jedi Knight, the day before her 18th birthday, Vanar had remained reluctant to send her into action, but a dire warning from Sith space had taken this decision from him. Vanar called upon every Jedi available for a vital mission on extremely short notice. Kara was available, and as it proved, essential. Kara had found the addition of field work to her duties enormously satisfying. All those forgotten, busy weeks preparing the way for others to strike at the Sith suddenly gained amplified meaning. Now she was the weapon, finally to be used in places she'd fled from when powerless. If anything, she prepared even harder for the mission. With Vanar and the other volunteers at her side, she'd have everything she needed. Today, on Darknell, what she needed was them, and they were gone forever. The mission at Chiloa had been a disaster. Everyone had been lost. Everyone. Damon's forces hadn't even been the cause. Vanar's team had become trapped in the madness that was Sith space. The problem with making only occasional forays into the region was they didn't know what they didn't know. Vanar had valued surprise in ensuring that his Jedi Knights got in and out quickly and safely, but he'd forgotten that he could be surprised too. Only Kara had survived, with none of the weapons, medicine, or supplies she had so carefully gathered. They and the starship they'd arrived in had disappeared into a sea of fire. Kara didn't even know how to get home. She'd memorized the hyperspace route they'd taken into Damon's territory, but that terminated at the planet they'd raided, a place now under such heavy guard she could never return to it. She'd been tempted to end her own journey soon afterward. Residents lived in constant despair, and meeting both Damon and Odion confirmed for her that things could never improve. Death was better than survival for those living underfoot, and perhaps for a Jedi alone. Better to go down fighting. It had taken making friends here, including one surprising, selfless individual, to change Kara's trajectory. You're no good to us dead, Vinar had always told her. That applied, too, to the people living under Sith rule. She was no good to them dead, either. Suicide by Sith wasn't the answer. She had to live. In a curious way, Kara's change of heart had been like another Vinar Treese raid. It stabbed into the darkness that had clouded her soul and offered hope. Defeating the Sith wasn't the point. Helping the people was. Fighting Sith was certainly one way the Jedi could help the downtrodden, but it wasn't the only way. Yes, the people needed bold, dramatic acts of the Vinar variety, but they also needed more than gestures. They needed things that did immediate good. A tall order for a team of Jedi, much less one acting alone. She'd have to manufacture her own opportunities. That required a plan. Planning she was good at. Kara was already in Damon's realm. He became the first target. Her feelings against Odian were stronger, but for that reason she didn't trust them. Anger over her childhood's premature end had already led her astray once. Damon was younger, and while he wasn't as physically powerful as his monstrous sibling, he was, in his own way, just as much of a threat. Damon was a creature utterly without empathy. At the academy, Kara had studied the notion of solipsism as it related to Sith teachings. None other than Darth Ruin had expounded upon it years before. Sith philosophy promoted the glorification of self and the subjugation of others. The young lord took it to a deranged extreme, declaring that existence was some game constructed by what? Some version of himself on a higher plane, pitting Damon's mortal body against artificial obstacles it had dreamed up, like physics and evil siblings. Damon's empire depended on the labor of others, but the lives of the others didn't matter to him. The parasite needed to be separated from the host, but first, its spread had to be contained. Kara found a good target in the munitions industry, which allowed Damon both to wage war and to oppress people on multiple worlds at once. It was better than striking at the military directly, even if she somehow found a way to land a devastating blow. Her worry was that Odian, or another opportunistic neighbor, might pour across the cosmic border, hurting more innocents still. Better to rot Damon's system from within, leaving the illusion of strength to his peers, but an empty shell inside. By the time the regime collapsed, she hoped most of the civilians would be out of harm's way. Her weeks since losing her master on Chiloa had included strikes against weapons plants on a string of worlds. In some cases, she'd been able to free the slave laborers and their families, but those opportunities had grown less frequent as she'd approached the center of Damon's realm. In the metropolis, there was no wilderness into which free natives could flee, but Dark Nell was obviously her ultimate goal. By striking Damon's military research efforts here, she could still factories on a dozen worlds at once. She'd arrived on Dark Nell as she had on the other worlds, disguised as an itinerant laborer on assignment. She'd blanched at that more than once. Disguise wasn't her forte. Persuasion, mesmerism, misdirection, these were skills for a Jedi who couldn't master lightsaber or blaster, not for an accomplished fighter like Kara. Vinar had used those ploys only to achieve military surprise. Kara could hardly stomach going through her daily life undercover, but she'd had little choice. Damon might doubt her sentience, but he knew she was part of the great game he'd devised for himself, and his force-sensitive correctors would be able to sense her presence. She had to be on her guard at all times. It had been happenstance that she'd spotted the Bothan while scouting the Black Fang herself, nights earlier. The spy was good, but he'd gotten too comfortable, selecting the same nearby rooftop to change into his stealth gear. She'd simply waited for her chance, His sabotage of the building was a terrific bonus, especially as it came at an hour when only Damon's true believers would be inside. She was almost sorry to leave the spy to his fate, but no ally of Odion could be a friend of hers. Odion was both brutal and insipid. It was no wonder half of his followers were suicidal. Kara scraped at the fabric of the stealth suit. Tiny raised lines crisscrossed its surface, leaving countless pits in between for its spectral baffles. Most of the paint clung to the ribbed fabric, she saw. It would be a problem. With this with his main military research lab in flames, Damon would be doubly on his guard, enough so to make her next move impossible without artificial help. But the suit wouldn't be much in the invisibility department without a proper cleaning. She flipped the suit inside out, a manufacturer's label, but no care instructions. That would be too easy, she thought. She was hardly in a position to call the manufacturer. Maybe she could ask someone at work down at the... What are you doing here? Carrie yanked the fabric close to her chest as she recognized her host's voice. Just about to do some laundry, she said, folding the suit over quickly and jamming it behind her bedroll. She turned to find Gubb standing in the doorway, curtain clenched in his fist. So much for privacy. What can I do for you? I remembered I had a message for you, Gubb growled. His voice was a gravel road, aggravated by years with a tiny water ration. But my granddaughter said you weren't here. Droopy eyebrows flared into a weak scowl. You went out. He says that like it's a bad word, Kara thought. Well, maybe here it is. I was called for the Wraith Watch, she said. It was what they called it down at the munitions plant. The one shift with no daylight, whatever the season. During sharply tilted Darknell's winter solstice, it was the morbid middle third of a 24-hour night. I had to go in. That's a lie, Gubb yanked at the curtain, ripping it free from the door jamb. It fell to the Duracrete floor. Kara edged backward, almost as wary of the little creature's wrath as she was of any Sith Lord. They'd had their bad moments since she'd turned up here offering to tutor his granddaughter for room and board. She was desperate not to let his moment get out of hand. Oh, she finally asked. Yes, he said, staring her down before finally kneeling to pick up the sheet. I know this isn't true, young human, because the message was from someone at your work, someone on the Wraith Watch, asking you to come in this morning. You clearly could not have already been there. Kara sighed. Damon allowed his slaves no communications devices. Couriers handled everything, even if it meant productivity suffered by messages being delayed. The odds of someone showing up while she was out skulking were long, but evidently not long enough. Kara searched for words. She didn't want to use the Force to persuade Gubb, not when they lived together. He'd figure that out eventually, and she was trying to use the Force as little as possible so as not to attract the corrector's attention, but she couldn't see what else to do. It isn't the first time, Gubb said, folding the sheet over his arm. Tan sleeps in the same room with you. She knows you leave at night. The girl's been covering for you. Master Tengo, don't blame... She imagines you have some great romance going, he continues. Why anyone would choose to bring more people into this world is beyond me. Kara stood and managed a blush. Okay, that's my way out. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Gubb straightened on his leg braces, looking at Kara. He exhaled audibly. Well, we're all to suffer now. You have to leave to work your shifts, and I expect you back here to tutor Tan as you're supposed to when she gets home from her work. At 12, Tan only had to work 8 hours a day. And think about me. I shall have to make my own breakfast. At that, the Celestin hobbled out, taking her door with him. Kara plopped back down on her bed cushion and rubbed her temples. More insanity. Shaking her head, she looked at her duffel and gulped. The handle of her lightsaber gleamed in the low light. She'd never stuffed it all the way into the bag on entering. She slapped it fully inside, then punched the bag a couple of times for good measure. One more day without sleep, one more day under cover, and probably a lot more days than that before she could do anything substantive against Damon. She might never survive at this rate. You'll know which skills you need when you need them, Vinar had always said. Well, he was right about that. Kara's worry was that she didn't have those skills at all, or the patience. That is the end of that chapter. The next one is a bit longer, but I think I'll go ahead and do it too. Chapter 3. You understand why we're doing this, Brigadier Rusher? The factory administrator said. We're loyal Damonites through to the core, and that's why we want to make sure we serve his lordship in the best way possible. The red-headed human in the entry hall rocked back and forth on shined boots. Of course. Administrator Laboon stared out the apartment window at the dense smoke hanging over the city. I've been running the plasteel works here on Darknell since the days of Lord Chagras, or those are the memories that have been given to me by Lord Damon. I'm the first Duros to hold such a position, and I've never been a shirker. Damon created the encumbered to serve him, and serve him we do. The tall green figure turned and gestured to his furnishings. I may live better than many, but it makes no difference to me whether my son was created for a place on my production line or on the front lines of battle. I know why we exist. Oh, of course, Brigadier Jero Rusher looked at the wall and smirked. It was a different story in every Sith Lord's territory, but he'd forgotten what a weird customer Damon was, sowing the fantasy that all creation was the figment of his warped imagination. Rusher had scars older than Damon's 25 years, but never mind. Those were apparently figments of his imagination. Maybe all those city blocks on fire when I landed were hallucinations too. But we know our child has talent, Laboon continued, crossing to the divan and placing his hand on his wife's shoulder. And that must mean, that a position with you is what his lordship intended for our son. It would be a waste of material otherwise. He looked up tentatively. Don't you agree, General? Oh, yes. Turning to face the couple, Rusher spoke in his best sales voice. That's exactly why you want your son in Rusher's brigade, Master Laboon. There's no place better for someone to find his potential. He fingered his lapel, subtly angling the silver pins in his trench coat so that they glinted in the warm light. The Duros had brought out the extra lumens today, he saw. Indoor light was rationed on Darknell, as everything else, even for the relatively well-off. We really would like our son to be in a place that challenges him, the prim Duros woman said, pressing green fingers to green cheeks. Off-world. Twirling the brassy knob atop his wooden walking stick, Rusher smiled. They'd reached that part. Of course, and you're probably asking whether going with us is safe. He turned to the calf dispenser, meticulously set out before him. Well, I'm not going to lie, he said, pouring himself a drink. We're at war, and in war people get hurt. But if you have to be on a battlefield, ma'am, there's no better place to be than next to a laser artillery piece. The brigadier elaborated on the quality of his armaments, drawing pictures in the air with a gloved hand. He'd known recruiters who brought formal holographic presentations, but it never seemed necessary to Rusher. When people in Sith space saw a ruddy, reasonably young man with all the limbs he was born with in charge of a military outfit, they inferred some level of competence or luck. And if that failed, he had a bigger gun. Now it was time to use it. What's more, he said, our shipboard fatalities in transit are 0. No one dies on the way to the fight. No one. He raised the cup to his lips and paused deliberately before continuing. It's because there are no Sith aboard. The Laboons gasped. None? No adepts, no adherents, no lieutenants, no grunts. We're specialists, Administrator. Independent militia units like ours are the fasteners that hold his lordship's whole military scheme together. Pairs of bulbous red eyes locked on him, other on each other before returning to him. We've never heard of such a thing. No Sith? Rusher sipped cloudy liquid from the cup. Surprisingly, there was a taste to it. Look, you operate a factory here on Darknell. Of course, you've got your Daemonite authorities looking over your shoulder all the time to ensure your progress, check quality, and all that. You wouldn't have it any other way, I'm sure. He waved in the general direction of the seaport. But the Caligdid 5000 cannon is an advanced piece of weaponry. It takes skilled squads of merc or of specialists to land them on the battlefield, assemble them, and put them into action. I think I should have pronounced that merce. Anyway, setting the cup down, he took the walking stick in both hands. One bonding pin out of place, one power couple misconnected, and you've got 17 tons of scrap just sitting out there. So we're our own judges of quality. If we don't do the job, if we don't do the work right on our own, we're already dead. Rusher rapped his cane on the floor to punctuate the statement. Oh my, Rusher grinned. He hadn't needed the cane for years, but the public liked it. Same for the early gray in his sideburns and beard. But we do the work right, ma'am. Like I say, we're experts. We don't need babysitting. We're not a regular part of Damon's structure at all. He caught himself. Which is, of course, how he intends it, being the creator and all. The male Duros sank to the couch beside his wife in disbelief. Rusher could see the words passing silently between them. No Sith. Rusher chuckled, right on target again. And our ship? Why, it's a pleasure palace. You saw Diligence on her approach over Zakria this morning. There isn't a better vessel in the sector. I'm sure we wouldn't know, but if you say so. I do. Many do. I built her myself, you know. I've got people who never want to leave, which is why openings are so few. Rusher turned to see an oval-shaped human in the doorway. Ah, this is Dackett, our ship's master. He'll be taking care of your son until he's assigned to one of our gun squads, or perhaps to my headquarters unit. Headquarters? The Laboons audibly cooed. Is that possible? I mean, he's a bright boy. Then there's no telling how far he'll go, Rusher said, staying out of the main room. Staying out of the main room. Dackett merely nodded, oversized ears crested with tufts of white hair. Rusher heard someone approach from the Laboon's bedchambers. Ah, here comes our soldier now, I think. Taller even than his parents, teenage Beetle Laboon strode confidently into the room wearing a fresh pair of neatly pressed work dungarees, standard uniform for youth laborers. Nodding to his parents, he offered a mock salute to the visitors and leaned against the calf cart, which promptly gave way under his weight, collapsing along with the gawky kid and several pots of beige water. Administrator Laboon looked at his son, mortified, as his wife knelt to help pick up the wreckage. Bound for your headquarters unit? Dackett whispered to Rusher in the doorway. We'll be lucky if he doesn't take out the whole ammo magazine, Rusher replied. Shooing his aide to the outer hall, Rusher gave the Laboons some time to compose their child, but turning back, he saw there wasn't enough time in Darknell's ridiculous day to manage that trick. While his mother dabbed at the stains on his shirt with her handkerchief, Beetle tried to extricate his hand from a tin carafe. The operation took nearly a minute, time during which the administrator's face grew longer than it already was. Sorry about that, sir, the squirming boy said. You should see what happens to my setup when the bombs start falling, Rusher said, summoning the smile again. And tell your parents not to worry. Like Garbellion said at Averem, war ain't a talent show. The Laboons didn't bother to confer. I think we're settled on this, Brigadier Rusher. the father said. Our boy will be in good hands. Rusher beamed. Very glad. He slapped a hand on young Beetle's shoulder. Welcome to the team, he said, shaking the boy's still dripping hand vigorously. In the same movement, he edged Beetle aside and looked directly at the administrator. There's just the matter of terms. The elder Laboon straightened. I was expecting this. You manage Damon's hydraulic lift factory. Diligence needs some new drives. We need 4 or 5. 6, came a voice from the hallway. We need 6 new drives for our offloading assemblies. Rusher gently but forcibly sat Beetle down on the couch and continued to speak over the teenager's head. They're key to getting Diligence safely off Darknell, with your son, of course. Of course, Administrator Laboon said dryly. It will be difficult. All we produce is for Damon, of course. And that's who we're fighting for. This is how it works. He didn't add. He didn't need to. 5 minutes later, Rusher eased out of the Laboon's apartment, walking stick at his side. Dackett was in the hall, waiting for him. Rusher tossed him the cane. Nice enough place, he said. Them that has, sir, them that has. Dackett smirked. Damon lets them live like that? Guess he throws a few crumbs to the true believers. And a good thing for us. Rusher nabbed the datapad from Dackett's waistcoat pocket and located an address. You'll have what you need by nightfall, whenever the blazes that is around here. Rusher began walking down the hall when the ship's master called out. Oh yeah, there's something else. What is it? Novallo just called from Diligence, Dackett said. She's chased down that problem on the port landing assembly. Wasn't the gimbals after all. We need the hydraulic accumulator on that side changed out before we lift off again. A complete replacement? Rusher scratched his beard. She can't jerry-rig something? Negative. Pricey? Yeah. Tell her it's covered, Rusher said, cocking an eyebrow as he turned back toward the apartment door. Let's see if they've got any other kids. Narsk woke up. That fact alone meant they didn't know who he was. The fact that he still didn't know where he was, though, meant he was in very deep trouble. The Jedi had been true to her word. She hadn't locked the garbage bin. That hadn't made it any easier to get out of, though, with his hands bound behind his back. It had taken painful minutes to force his way out, and even then he'd landed on his bad leg, clambering down. His cry had attracted the attention of Damon's sentries, checking out the speeder bike debris on the nearby sky bridge. Bound and half naked, Narsk wasn't likely to escape attention. Damon's thugs had rounded up a number of individuals from the streets of Zakria in the hours following the destruction of his testing center. Narsk had met some when they were hauling him away in the transport. Most were homeless invalids, unable to work. Damon usually didn't bother to liquidate those. As the first day had passed, he'd grown more confident. They'd all gone to the sentry station on Administrative Way for questioning, where a corrector had interviewed each of the bystanders. Several vagrants were chucked down the front stairs of the station to the street, excused from further questioning. Narsk had hoped they'd do the same with him. Waiting for his reprieve, he'd finally given in to sleep that evening. A mistake. For later that night he'd woken not in the seamy cell of the station, but strapped to a stone table, wet with sweat in a marble-walled room. He was almost relieved when 4 of Damon's burgundy-clad correctors entered. It meant he was still on Darknell. He'd had a nightmare of being found by Odian, furious over his failure to rescue the secrets of the late lamented Convergence. No wonder he'd awakened with drenched fur. Correctors buzzed in and out of the room through portals visible to him only as black spots at the edge of his vision. The straps were so tight he couldn't turn his head, and it was what was inside his head that held their interest. Nars couldn't imagine how he could have confused the Jedi with a corrector. The correctors walked around broadcasting their presence through the Force, making sure he knew they had the ability to enter his mind at will. The Jedi, meanwhile, hadn't put any mental pressure on him at all, probably for fear of being spotted by correctors. But she would have seen them coming, Narsk thought. No wonder she's been able to hide here. The correctors departed for a moment, allowing him to think more freely about what had happened. How long had the Jedi been shadowing him? She had to be Kara Holt. Had she just happened upon him? Had she told anyone else he was there? Did they have her now? The answers mattered. She could give him away. You, an Arcanian accented voice said. Narsk rolled his bloodshot eyes back to see the purple cowl of one of the correctors who'd interviewed him before. You were found in Manufacturer's District without leave, without clothes. I told you, Narsk said. I was mugged. It's why I don't have my work permit on me. He repeated yet again the details of his cover identity. Machine tool operator, transferred from Nilash, trying to arrive at work early. The words seemed to form a structure of their own in his mind, a protective surface covering his true mission, and the truer, more secret mission beneath that one. Narsk saw the Arcanian's white, irisless eyes hidden as the corrector widen as the corrector leaned over him. Another mental invasion was about to begin. Suddenly, the familiar figure leaned back to be replaced by another, just out of his sight behind the head of the table. This is the one? As my lord knows. As my lord knows, Narsk lurched against the restraints, nearly cracking his clavicle. Lord Damon! There is something in you, said the same voice from the sunrise and sunsets. Golden talons molded to human fingertips scraped the side of Narsk's face. There is something in you. It must come out. The correctors had rifled through Narsk's mind in anger. That was an assault he was mentally prepared for. Compartmentalization exercises had helped him to bury what was important. In their eagerness to prove their dominance, the Sith adepts had missed everything important. But Damon seemed indifferent, casually rifling through Narsk's mind with all the interest of a window shopper. I created this mind, Damon seemed to say. The unspoken words echoed in Narsk's flared ears. Damon believed he had created Narsk's mind just as he might have programmed a droid, and while he might not have immediate access to all the information in the Bothan's head, the Sith Lord felt perfectly within his rights to go looking for it now. An unbidden image appeared in Narsk's mind. Dark hair, brown skin, glistening, determined eyes, and green light. The Jedi! Damon released his mental hold on Narsk, who had never once seen his captor. The errant knight is here, Damon said, startled. On Darknell. Narsk's whiskers bristled upward. For the first time since the night before, something in the mess had worked to his advantage. They haven't caught her yet. Maybe they won't. Yes, Narsk said, panting, his mouth dry. It was a woman with a lightsaber. His eyes narrowed. I feared to tell you, my lord. Her presence here, I didn't understand it. It frightened me. I tried to run when I saw her, tried to warn someone. The story flowed seamlessly into his tale of a random attack. His shame, he said, had prevented him from revealing all before. Such a person should never have bested a true Damonite. Damon stepped back from the table. Narsk hoped he was considering the story. It was almost too much to hope for to be set free, but if there was anyone he needed to convince, Damon was the one. Narsk's heart fell when another corrector entered from another portal. The spy heard Damon inquire, What is it? As my lord knows, the new corrector said, using what Narsk imagined was a standard form for addressing the theoretically omniscient. A package has just been discovered on a rooftop near the testing center. It was hidden beneath a vent cover, a bundle containing clothes and a travel permit. The hollow imprint matches the prisoner, as my lord knows. So he has been near the testing center, kilometers from where he was found? As my lord knows. The shadow of Damon fell on Narsk again, only this time the shadow was not cast by light, but by darkness. Narsk struggled. He'd been told he could only protect his secrets from Damon with a wall of will, a defiant insistence that his brain was his and his alone. You're not sentient, Damon said in his mind. Don't pretend to be. Narsk screamed. They're here for the girl. Kara froze on the steps when she heard her neighbor's voice. Tall, shadowy figures had just entered Gub Tango's apartment at the far end of the long basement hall. She couldn't make out any details about them, but they'd certainly attracted the attention of the other residents, still buzzing in the halls. They're here for the girl. Not waiting to inquire, Kara twirled and dashed back up the steps to the streets. None of it made sense. She hadn't felt any malevolent presence while entering the Borat Warren that was Gub's apartment block, and Damon's correctors weren't exactly keeping a low profile. Far from it. She'd seen them earlier in the transport station, making examples of the poor wretches they'd rousted from the factories. They'd been doing it for 5 days, at every shift change, so the commuters could see. None of the harassed had anything to do with the destruction of the testing center, but she figured Damon probably knew that. Two of the faulty encumbered had been ripped from her own workplace earlier in the day. One had recently criticized the work schedule. The other, a Snivian grandmother, had accidentally used an offhand expression invoking the spirits of her ancestors. Both were candidates for a public form of correction, involving alternating bouts of mental and physical abuse. Spectacle always served Damon when something went wrong. Kara had wanted to leap the platform and do something, there and then, but she'd learned her lesson since Chiloa. Gub and Tan didn't deserve to be endangered over something they knew nothing about. It had been risky even moving in with them. After arriving on Darknell, she'd looked for someone who needed a needed a border. Then their home had seemed the perfect cover, but now as she ducked outside, it felt like the worst idea ever. She couldn't make this mistake again. Vinar had said it. Keep saying next time, Kara, and someday there might not be one waiting. Kara doubled back behind the apartment building, an iridium processing plant long since retired. The idea of using an old factory for housing always seemed noxious to her, but she was glad of the place now, with its many ways in and out. The two ankle-level windows of Gub's place lay ahead, just behind the sad little gnaw roots he'd planted to supplement their rations. Kara had never entered this way in daylight before, but there wasn't any choice. Seeing Tan absent, Kara slipped in and examined her duffel. Yes, everything was still there. Fingering her lightsaber, she listened to the voices beyond the recently replaced privacy curtain. Gub was out there, along with someone else. Voices excited, but not distressed. Tucking the weapon into the deep pocket inside her work vest, she allowed herself to breathe. Maybe it's not so bad after. Hey! The curtain jerked back, causing Kara to reach abruptly for the bulge in her vest. Wide black eyes peered up at her from waist level. Kara relaxed as she recognized her young charge. You scared me, Tan. I didn't know you were home, the Celestin girl said, but I'm glad you are. Normally a bundle of energy, Tan was nearly bursting today. Her young jowls curled upward in absolute joy. They're here! They're here for me! Kara could only look down in puzzlement as the girl grabbed her by the wrist and yanked her into the main room. 7 eyes suddenly stared back. Old Gub stood before 2 taller beings in the doorway. A male Gran peered at her curiously, his trio of dark eyes curling on leathery stalks. The other, an Ishi-Tib female, gave a squawk of mild surprise, her lidless yellow eyes shining in the low light. Both, Kara noticed, wore blinking cybernetic implants at their temples. Pardon me, Gub grumbled, turning away from the visitors. He glared at Kara. What were you doing in there? I didn't see you come in. Didn't you? Kara changed the subject, hoping he would forget. Who are your guests? She bowed her head toward the visitors. The Gran seemed pleased. Leaf-like ears wiggled above his implants. Ah, you must be the tutor. His face curled into a tiny smile, about the most his narrow snout would manage. Lerlar Jum, at your service, and my colleague is Erafa. We're from Industrial Heuristics. Kara looked at the badge proffered by the Gran. Your salespeople? Certainly not, Lerlar said. Beside him, the star-faced Ishi Tib gurgled something like a guffaw. Somehow the cybernetic devices were allowing them to communicate. Gubb, unhappy at the interruption, glared at Kara. They're the reason I took you in, human. They're talent scouts, Gubb said. Here to see Tan. Talent scouts. The stresses of the previous minutes evaporating, Kara's eyes narrowed. The 12-year-old Celestin spent her mornings in one of Damon's scavenge plants, disassembling technological the technological detritus of decades past for salvage, but even the supervisor at that miserable place had noticed Tan's acuity with electronics, loaning the girls operators guide datapads found in Republic Rex to peruse. With Gubb too busy discovering the creator of the universe in scraps from the trash, he'd hired Tara to teach Tan how to read. Any advance in her skills might mean a softer future, assembling blasters perhaps. These visitors, however, had more in mind. Kara looked more closely at the Ishi Tibbs badge of a kind she'd never seen before. The identification allowed newcomers to move about on Darknell. It would be worth getting hold of one, she thought. She'd never heard of industrial heuristics either. Damon dissolved most corporations he'd captured, but she'd seen a few commercial names operating in his space. This was a new one. Our headquarters is in Lord Bactra's region, Lerlar said, sensing her confusion. Lord Damon has generously provided a dispensation allowing us to recruit in his territory. Not for nothing, Kara thought. You're taking Tan away? We mean to transform Tan. The jade-skinned Ishi Tib squawked something in evident agreement. This morning, Lerlar went on, at her place of work, we evaluated her proficiency on the advice of her superiors, and we have determined that to a mathematical certainty, her talent, her destiny, that which makes her special. The Gran clasped his bony hands together. Bomb sights. Bomb sights? Yes, Lord Damon's fighters use precision-guided munitions, but for the most part the guidance comes from the weapons themselves. To keep the vehicles small and nimble, as few systems as are built on board as possible. That much is true, Kara thought, rolling her eyes. She'd ridden in one of Damon's flying death traps soon after her arrival in Sith space. She was surprised he'd bothered with oxygen. The Grand continued. Generally, gravity-assisted bombs are smart enough to find their targets on their own. But in the presence of electronic countermeasures, it can help to have manual guidance. Lerlar gestured to Tan, now blushing so hard her skin had turned a pale brown. Tan will join an off-world team devoted to developing the next generation of optics. For Damon? Kara asked. For whomever he chooses, Lerlar said. She is his to dispose of course. The Grand rambled about industrial heuristics, long history in the sector, and how the company had proudly supplied a long list of Sith Lords over the years. He seemed thrilled that Damon would be added to the list. Your leader supplies us the raw materials, we finish the product. What product? Why, Tan is the product. Properly educated, that is. He rested his bony hand on Tan's head. Industrial heuristics is, in its own way, another factory. We manufacture intellects. Tan smiled up at the visitors and then at Kara. The youngling was ecstatic. This is what I've always wanted, Kara. What we've been working toward. Kara had never known of any specific goal Tan was working toward. She'd just assumed literacy was good in and of itself. But the girl acted as if she'd been reprieved from a death sentence. Maybe she had. At the same time, though, it seemed like another kind of prison to Kara, and so it seemed to Gubb. Bomb sights? Gubb stared at his granddaughter, his eyes weary. That's all she'll learn about? Only that? The Ishi Tib trilled an answer, which Lerlar translated. An engineer is a part like any other, he said, specialized, devoted to a specific function, replaceable should the need arise. Tan would learn her specialty in a setting with other hand-picked students who would, form her work group in later life. There isn't any need for her to learn about anything else, the Grand chuckled. You wouldn't try to boil water with a blaster. Kara steamed. It was all so backward. Tan would be doomed to a life little different from Gubb's, putting Damon's imprint on the past. Almost anything in the next generation of uh, optics, she estimated, would have been discovered long ago. Discovered and lost in the interminable years of conflict during which countless universities, corporations, and scholars had been lost. They were constantly trying to rediscover knowledge they themselves had destroyed. Where would she go? Gubb asked, looking down. Not seeming to understand why it mattered, the Grand explained that his company had education centers throughout Bactra's space, as well as some mobile centers. Of course, after recent events here, Tan might well find an opening closer to home. Damon had proclaimed publicly that the Black Fang had been demolished to make way for a new and better research center, even if the ongoing public inquisition suggested otherwise. Damon might well be in the market for more brain power. It's what his lordship intends, Gubb said, limping across the room. He took his granddaughter's hands in his. The old man trembled, holding back tears. You will go. Kara shot the scouts a look as the Celestins embraced. As far as they were concerned, Tan didn't have an option. They wanted her. She would go, and right away. The Ishi-Tib waved off Gubb's efforts to give his granddaughter anything to take along. The recruits were being taken to a staging area at the spaceport, Lerlar said. Transports had already been sent for. Whatever facility she went to would have everything she'd ever need. And it will be all she'll ever have, Kara thought. But as she'd been seen every day, life under Sith rule was a constant negotiation. The only way to improve things was on the margins. Take care, she said, hugging a tearful but happy Tan in the doorway. May the Force be with you. Let it be with something out here for a change, she thought to herself. Gubb lingered, sad and small, in the doorway. Outside, neighbors parted and watched amazed as one of their own escaped. She'll remain a slave, Kara whispered behind her landlord's back. But she'll have an easier time of it, Gubb responded. In a year, Tan would be 13 and obligated to work 3 shifts daily, if she wanted to be fed at all. There was no guarantee her next assignment wouldn't be more dangerous. She could even wind up drafted. A safer monotony wasn't a bad thing, especially if it was somewhere else. The old man straightened, his leg braces creaking. She'll have an easier time of it, he said again, almost to himself. As will I. Limping back inside, he found Kara's curtain again. A stiff yank brought it down for the second time in a week. The message was clear. You want me to go. Gubb looked up at her, fat eyes communicating the obvious. The child was gone. Kara was no longer necessary. He took the curtain, now a sheet again, and draped it across the chair where he did his work. Kara looked blankly into the darkened room. Evicted from a closet. Come now, the old man said, depositing himself in his seat before the desk. Now you will be able to work a third 8-hour shift and qualify for a room and ration of your own. But of course, Kara needed her nights. I'm glad I was able to help, Master Tango, she said to his back. I'll be out in the morning. Tonight, he said, charging his pen against his knee. Wow. And that is the end of that chapter. So our next one, it looks like I'll do 2 more chapters next time. Chapters 4 and 5. But anyway, yeah, that wasn't so bad. Need to just stick with it and be more consistent with it. So, all right, everyone have a good night, and I will see you on Friday for the next reading in Stairway to Heaven, Zechariah Sitchin.